They put me at the table closest to the kitchen. Not because I asked for it. Not because it was convenient. Because no one thought to put me anywhere else. I could hear the clinking of silverware from the main hall, the laughter rolling in waves every time my brother-in-law made a toast. My sister's anniversary party, 25 years, was being held at the Hargrove Estate, a rented venue outside of Columbus, Ohio, that my mother had been planning for the better part of 8 months. There were round tables dressed in ivory linen, centerpieces with white roses and eucalyptus, a string quartet playing something soft near the entrance. It was beautiful. I know because I walked through it on my way to where I was told to sit. My chair faced a swinging kitchen door. Every time a server pushed through it, I got a blast of warm air that smelled like garlic bread and dish soap. And somehow, that wasn't even the most humiliating part. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old. And for the past 6 years, I've been a trauma surgeon at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. I completed my undergraduate degree in 3 years, went straight through medical school at Johns Hopkins, finished my surgical residency faster than anyone in my cohort, and then accepted a fellowship position working specifically with wounded service members, soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors, people who came back from places most Americans would never see, carrying damage that would take everything I had to fix. I have operated for 14 hours straight without leaving the table. I have made decisions in under 30 seconds that determined whether someone's child came home or came home in a flag-draped casket. My mother tells people I work at a hospital near Washington. She says it the same way she mentions the weather. My sister Claire is 3 years older than me. She married a man named Douglas when I was in my 2nd year of residency, and the wedding, which I attended for exactly 4 hours before flying back for an emergency surgery, became the subject of family conversation for the next 2 years. How I left early, how I didn't stay for the dancing, how it was, in my mother's words, a little selfish, considering everything Claire had been through to plan that day. What Claire had been through, for context, was choosing between 2 catering companies and disagreeing with my mother about the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. Douglas is a nice enough man. He sells commercial real estate and coaches his son's Little League team on weekends and laughs very loudly at his own jokes before he finishes telling them he is, by every measure I've encountered, completely ordinary. My mother thinks he is remarkable. She has told me so directly, on more than one occasion, usually in the same conversation where she asks me if I'm still doing all that surgery stuff and whether I've thought about moving closer to home. Home is Westerville, Ohio. I love it. I don't want to live there. The anniversary party was my mother's idea, my sister's event, and I understood from the moment I received the invitation, not really something I was meant to participate in so much as attend. There's a difference. Attending means you showed up. Participating means someone thought about you when they were arranging the room. I drove in from Columbus Airport the afternoon before, stayed in a hotel because my mother's house was full with Claire's in-laws, and arrived at the Hargrove Estate at 6:15, 15 minutes before the party was scheduled to begin. I was wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, dark green, fitted, the kind of thing I almost never wear because most of my life is spent in scrubs or business clothes. I had done my hair. I had made an effort. I found my mother near the entrance, directing a server toward the coat check. She looked up when she saw me, smiled the way you smile at someone you weren't quite expecting, and said, "Oh good, you made it. Rachel, could you go check that the card table near the kitchen has enough chairs? I think we might be one short." I checked the card table near the kitchen. It had enough chairs. One of them was mine. I found this out 20 minutes later when the guests began to find their seats and a woman named Trish Douglas's cousin, whom I had met once at Christmas 3 years ago, looked at my place card, and then at me and said, very cheerfully, "Oh, we're table buddies. How fun. Table buddies." I sat down. The card table seated 6. Besides Trish, there was her husband Gary, who spent most of the evening on his phone, a couple I didn't recognize who turned out to be neighbors of Douglas's parents visiting from out of town, and an elderly woman named Evelyn who was hard of hearing and kept asking me to repeat myself, which I did, twice, before giving up and just nodding along to whatever she seemed to be saying. From where I sat, I could see the main table. My mother was there, seated to Claire's left. Douglas's parents were there, and his brother, and 2 of Claire's oldest friends from high school, who had been bridesmaids at the wedding. There were toasts being prepared, there were glasses being raised. My glass was a water glass that still had a faint lip print on the rim from whoever had used it before it was reset. I thought about leaving. I want to be honest about that. I sat in that chair with my back to the kitchen door, and I thought about standing up, walking to my car, driving back to the hotel, and catching an early flight home. No one would notice until the toasts began, and maybe not even then. I could send a card. I could call Claire in the morning and tell her the party was lovely, and I was sorry I had to step out. I didn't leave. I don't entirely know why. Maybe because leaving felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit, that I had driven 400 miles to be seated at a card table near a kitchen, and that this was, without anyone saying so out loud, what my family thought of me. So I stayed. I ate the bread. I made conversation with Trish about her garden and with Gary about literally nothing. I listened to Evelyn tell me a story I couldn't fully follow about a cruise she had taken in 1987. The main course arrived. More toasts at the head table. Laughter. Photographs. The string quartet shifted into something livelier, and then a woman about my age, one of the servers, leaned down while refilling my water glass and said, quietly, "I'm sorry about this table. You deserve better." I looked up at her. "The seating chart was weird," she said, and then moved on before I could respond. I sat with that for a moment. A 23-year-old server catering a private event in Columbus, Ohio, had noticed something my mother and sister had not bothered to consider. I was somewhere between amused and devastated. That was when I heard my name. Not from the main table. From behind me, near the edge of the room, where a few guests were standing with cocktails near the bar. "Rachel? Rachel Mercer?" I turned around. The man walking toward me was in his mid-60s, silver-haired, wearing a dark suit with a folded pocket square. He was tall and moved the way certain people move when they have spent decades being the most important person in any room, not arrogant, exactly, but with a kind of settled authority, like gravity works slightly differently around them. It took me a full 3 seconds to place him. Brigadier General Thomas Halworth, retired. I had worked under his medical task force during a 6-week deployment consultation program at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. 2 years ago, he had been overseeing the integration of civilian surgical specialists with military trauma units, and I had been one of 4 surgeons selected for the program. I had spent 6 weeks operating alongside military surgeons on the most complex trauma cases I had ever seen, and General Halworth had overseen all of it, sitting in on case reviews, pushing us harder than we thought we could be pushed. And then, at the end, shaking each of our hands and saying specific things. Not generic things. Specific things. What he had said to me was, "You have the instincts. Don't let anyone domesticate that." I had thought about that sentence more times than I could count. "General Halworth," I said, and started to stand. He waved me back down, and then, instead of remaining standing, pulled out the empty chair across from me and sat down. At the card table, in his dark suit. Like this was perfectly normal. "I thought that was you," he said. "You look exactly the same." "You're here for the party?" I asked, which was obvious, but I was still recalibrating. "Douglas Fenn is the son of an old colleague of mine," he said. "Arthur Fenn. We served together for a long time. When Arthur called to say his son was celebrating 25 years and would I come say a few words, I couldn't say no." He glanced around the table at Trish and Gary and the out-of-town neighbors and Evelyn, who was now asleep, and then back at me. "I'll be honest with you, I didn't expect to find you here. I'm Claire's sister," I said. "The anniversary is hers and Douglas's." He nodded slowly, and I watched something shift slightly in his expression. He was reading the room, I realized. He had walked over to a card table near the kitchen, where one of the sharpest trauma surgeons he had worked with was sitting with strangers while the party happened 30 feet away, and he was understanding, without me having to say a word, exactly what this was. "How is Walter Reed treating you?" he said. "Well, we're building out a new protocol for blast injury intervention. I'm leading the research team." "I heard something about that," he said. "Through Jameson, you know Colonel Jameson?" "I do. He's consulting on the protocol. He mentioned your name. Said you were the one holding the whole thing together." He said it matter-of-factly, the way he had always delivered assessments. No inflation, no softening, just the thing itself. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. He looked at me steadily for a moment. "Dr. Mercer, how long have you been sitting at this table?" "Since seating began, and your family knows what you do at Walter Reed." It wasn't quite a question. I answered it anyway. "My mother knows I'm a surgeon. The specifics tend to get lost. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to be speaking in about 45 minutes. I'd like you to be at the table where I can see you when I do." I looked at him. "I don't want to cause a scene," I said. "I'm not asking you to cause anything," he said. "I'm asking you to sit somewhere that makes sense." He paused. "There's an open seat at table 2. I'll walk you over." I thought about saying no. There's a part of me that had been trained not by anyone in particular, but by years of being the person who made things easier for everyone else to make myself small in spaces where I hadn't been invited to be large. I knew how to step back. I had been doing it my entire life outside of the operating room. But I also thought about the server who had said, quietly, "You deserve better." And I thought about what General Hallworth had said to me 2 years ago, in a room in Germany, after 6 weeks of the hardest work I had ever done. "Don't let anyone domesticate that." "Okay," I said. He stood, and I stood with him. And he walked me across the room to table 2, not the head table, but close enough that when my mother looked up from her conversation, she went still in the way people go. Still when they see something they weren't expecting, and aren't sure how to process. Claire noticed too. I watched her say something to Douglas, and Douglas look over, and then look away. General Hallworth introduced me to the 2 couples at table 2. He said, "This is Dr. Rachel Mercer. We work together at Landstuhl. She's one of the best trauma surgeons I've encountered in 30 years of working with military medicine." One of the women reached out her hand immediately. "I've heard about the Walter Reed blast protocol," she said. "My son is Army. We follow anything that comes out of that program." I shook her hand. I sat down. I had a real glass this time. The kind without someone else's lip print on it. 40 minutes later, General Hallworth stood to speak. The room quieted the way rooms quiet for certain people quickly, fully, without anyone having to ask twice. He spoke about Douglas's father Arthur with warmth and precision. He spoke about the value of commitment and the underappreciated courage of ordinary life. He was good at this, at saying true things without making them sound rehearsed. And then, near the end, he said this: "I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone in this room who represents something I think we sometimes forget to celebrate. There are people among us who do extraordinary work in extraordinary silence, who serve without ceremony, who save lives without recognition, who show up to hard places and do hard things, and then come back to their families and sit down to dinner and don't say a word about any of it." He paused, and the room was very still. Dr. Rachel Mercer is a trauma surgeon at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. She has operated on wounded service members from multiple combat theaters. She is currently leading a research initiative that will change how we treat blast injuries for the next generation of soldiers. She is also, I've just learned tonight, the sister of our guest of honor. He looked at Claire, then at my mother. "You have someone remarkable in your family. I hope you know that." He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at them. The room applauded. Not politely, genuinely. The kind of applause that builds because people feel like they're participating in something that matters. I looked at my mother. She was not crying, which surprised me. She was sitting very straight, her hands folded on the table, her expression unreadable. She looked like someone who had just been handed a piece of information and hadn't yet decided what to do with it. Claire looked at me from across the room. She looked, I don't have a better word for this, caught. Not ashamed, exactly. Caught. Like someone who understood, in this specific moment, that a version of events she had been maintaining quietly for a long time had just become difficult to maintain. Douglas leaned over and said something to her. She nodded and didn't say anything back. After the speech, people came to my table. Not to be polite, people can tell the difference. And so can I, but because they wanted to talk about the protocol, about Walter Reed, about people they knew or loved who had been through the military medical system. A man named Phil told me his nephew had been treated at Walter Reed after an IED injury in 2019, and that the surgical team there had saved his life. He said it the way people say things they have been carrying for a long time. I listened. I told him the team there was extraordinary. I meant it. My mother came over near the end of the evening. She stood across from me for a moment, and I waited, because I had learned a long time ago not to fill silences that belonged to other people. I didn't know, she said finally. About the research program. You never asked, I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. She looked at her hands. Rachel, Mom. I kept my voice level. I don't need tonight to be a whole thing. I'm glad I came. She looked up. I am glad I came, I said again. Because I meant it, and I wanted her to understand I meant it. But I need you to hear what I'm saying. Not tonight. Not as a conversation we have right now. Just at some point. I need you to hear it. She nodded. She didn't say much else. She went back to the head table, and I watched her sit down and look at the center of the table for a long moment before she picked up her glass. General Halworth found me before I left. Thank you, I told him. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said. I did it because it was true. That's the only reason worth doing anything. He shook my hand the way he had shaken it 2 years ago, in Germany, firmly. Once, looking directly at me. I drove back to the hotel through the Columbus suburbs, through the quiet streets I had grown up near, past the exits I had taken 1,000 times as a kid. I didn't cry, which I had been afraid I might. I felt something else instead, something steadier, less fragile than relief. I thought about the server who had said I deserved better. I thought about the woman at table 2 whose son was Army, who reached out her hand before she even knew my name. I thought about Phil and his nephew. I thought about the operating room, which is the place in my life where nothing else exists, not my mother's voice, not my sister's party, not the card table near the kitchen, only the work and the patient, and the absolute present tense of keeping someone alive. That room has always known what I'm worth. I'm still learning to let the rest of the world catch up. And somewhere in Columbus, at a 25-year anniversary party that will be discussed for years, a retired brigadier general said my name out loud in a room full of people who had been happy to leave it unsaid. Only he and I understood the full weight of what had just happened. The applause was for the story. The moment was for me. I flew home the next morning. I had a surgery scheduled at 7 a.m., Monday. I did not miss it.